All right, let's dive into the 1930s. This was a decade where one diplomatic failure after another paved a direct road to the Second World War. We're going to explore how that fragile peace that was built after the Great War just completely fell apart, making another global conflict pretty much inevitable. You know, sometimes history gives you a quote that's just spooky in its accuracy, and this is one of them. Back in 1919, the top Allied commander, Marshal Foch, looked at the Treaty of Versailles and wasn't happy. But his reason might surprise you. He didn't think it was too tough on Germany. He thought it wasn't tough enough. He basically said, all we've done here is hit the pause button on a war that's going to restart in about 2 decades. And wow, was he right. So how was this shaky peace supposed to be kept? Well, the world's big idea was the League of Nations. I mean, it had this incredibly noble goal of preventing war forever. But as we're about to see, the idea was one thing, the reality was something else entirely. Okay, so the whole system was built on this one core principle, collective security. The idea was actually pretty simple and kind of beautiful. An attack on any member nation would be seen as an attack on all of them. Think of it like a beta version of NATO. The plan was for everyone to team up, use diplomacy, slap on some economic sanctions, and stop the aggressor in their tracks. It was a really hopeful vision for a world that was just sick of war. But the League was basically born with fatal flaws. For starters, the United States, whose own president had championed the idea, refused to join. That just immediately gutted its credibility. Then you have the fact that it had no army, no teeth. How do you enforce anything? On top of that, every single decision had to be unanimous, which means any country could just veto something they didn't like. And here's the kicker. If the League did manage to condemn a country, that nation could just pack its bags and leave. With all these problems, how on earth could it work? Well, it didn't take long for some ambitious countries to start poking at the League, testing its limits. And what they found was what a lot of people feared. It was a total paper tiger, completely unable to stop anyone who was really determined. The first real test came in 1931. Japan, a member of the League, invades Manchuria. The League, of course, condemns the action, and Japan's response? They just quit, literally just walked out. Then, a few years later, Mussolini's Italy invades Abyssinia. The League put sanctions on them, but, and you can't make this up, they didn't sanction oil, the one thing that could have actually crippled the Italian war effort. So, just like Japan, Italy shrugged, ignored everyone, and eventually left the League too. The weaknesses were out there for everyone to see. And these weren't just isolated events happening in a vacuum. No way. These sent a loud, clear message to the rest of the world, especially to a certain rising leader in Germany. And that message was, international law is basically optional. You can invade your neighbors, you can rip up treaties, and the supposed guardians of world peace will do pretty much nothing. Adolf Hitler was paying very, very close attention. He saw the division between the Allies, he saw the powerlessness of the League, and he saw a golden opportunity. So he began to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, step by step, with one bold gamble after another. And his approach was so methodical. First, in 1935, he just flat out announced he was rearming Germany, building an air force, starting a draft, all things forbidden by the treaty. The world protested, but that was it. So, in 36, he took an even bigger risk. He marched his troops back into the Rhineland, this demilitarized buffer zone with France. A huge gamble. Again, nothing but angry words from the Allies. So, of course, he gets bolder. In 1938, he annexes Austria. With every roll of the dice that paid off, he grew more powerful and more confident. Now, looking back, it is so easy to ask, why didn't anyone stop him? But the answer is, well, it's really complicated. The inaction from the Allies wasn't just them being weak. It was part of a deliberate, though you could say deeply flawed, foreign policy. And that policy was called appeasement. At its heart, appeasement, a policy that's forever linked to British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, is about giving an aggressor what they claim to want in order to prevent a much bigger fight. It was a strategy literally born out of the absolute horror of World War I and the desperate desire to never, ever go through that again. And you really have to try to put yourself in their shoes to get it. The pressure on leaders like Chamberlain was immense. At home, the British public was overwhelmingly anti-war. The memory of WW1 wasn't a history lesson, it was a fresh wound. Plus, the Great Depression was raging, so money needed to go to social programs, not to the military. Then you look at the empire. Could Britain even count on places like Canada or Australia to join another European war? No guarantee. And internationally,
America was isolationist, many Brits actually felt Germany got a raw deal with the Versailles Treaty, and some even saw a strong Germany as a useful wall against Stalin's communism. So it's complicated.
Now, this brings us to a more modern way of looking at appeasement. It's this idea that maybe it wasn't just about giving in. Maybe it was a desperate two-sided strategy called the dual policy. Publicly, Chamberlain had to push for peace. It's what the people wanted, and it bought him time. But privately, he was using that time to frantically rearm Britain, to build the Spitfires and the radar network that would be absolutely crucial for survival just a few years later. It was a huge strategic gamble. But was it a clever delay tactic, or just a convenient excuse for doing nothing? Historians still argue about it today. But this gamble, this strategy of buying time, it came at a terrible, terrible price. And that price was going to be paid by another country. The policy of appeasement was about to have its big moment in the spotlight, and its most infamous failure, at a conference in Munich. So, the year is 1938, and Hitler's got a new target, the Sudetenland. It's a border region of Czechoslovakia that had a lot of ethnic Germans. He completely fabricates this crisis, claiming that Germans there are being persecuted, and he threatens to invade. Suddenly, Europe is right back on the brink of a massive war. So what were the Allies going to do?
Well, to try and head off a war, Chamberlain flies to Germany, and the result is the Munich Conference. You've got Britain, France, Italy, and Germany all at the table. But notice who's missing from that list. Yeah, Czechoslovakia. The country whose fate was literally being decided wasn't even invited to the meeting. And the decision these four powers made was to sacrifice Czechoslovakia. They forced it to hand over the Sudetenland to Germany, all based on Hitler's solemn promise that this was it, this was his last territorial demand in Europe.
So Chamberlain flies back to London, and he's treated like a hero. He gets off the plane, he's waving this piece of paper signed by Hitler, and he's met by these cheering crowds as he declares he has secured peace for our time. You can just imagine the wave of relief that washed over the continent. For a moment, it really felt like they had dodged the bullet. But not everybody was cheering. Not by a long shot. In Parliament, one voice in particular rose up to condemn the whole thing. Winston Churchill, who'd been warning about Hitler for years, just tore the agreement to shreds. He said they hadn't bought peace, they'd bought shame. And that far from avoiding war, they had just made it more certain. He saw it for what it was, a total and unmitigated disaster. And it took only 6 months, just 6 months, to prove Churchill was right. In March of 1939, Hitler broke his promise. His armies didn't stop at the Sudetenland. They rolled into the rest of Czechoslovakia and took the whole country. And with that, any last shred of hope that Hitler could be trusted, that his ambitions were limited, was just gone. The policy of appeasement was officially dead. And just like that, the unraveling was complete. The whole international system that was designed to stop war had totally failed. Aggression had been rewarded time and time again. Diplomacy was exhausted. At this point, a global conflict wasn't just possible anymore. It was practically a certainty. The path was clear. So this leaves us with one of history's great, agonizing questions. Was appeasement a disastrous act of cowardice that just fed the crocodile, hoping it would eat him last? Or was it a grim, pragmatic gamble by leaders who knew they were unprepared for war and were desperately trying to buy time? It's a question that we still wrestle with today. Thank you for watching.